Hi everyone, this is Dr. Victoria Nalule, and today I want to take you through mining contractual arrangements and the fiscal regime. So like we all know, for the countries that are endowed with minerals, these are very essential for economic development. The mining sector has been the foundation of economic development for many resource-rich countries. Like Canada has a lot of minerals. Australia has minerals. The USA has minerals. Um, Norway has minerals. Namibia has minerals. So there's some countries that have really benefited from their mining sector, but however, there are also other countries that haven't been able to benefit. So the mining sector has the potential of ensuring that countries can benefit from their resources, or that citizens can be able to benefit from the resources. But today we want to talk about mining contractual arrangements and the fiscal regime to try and understand some of the basics that governments need to negotiate, or the negotiating points for these fiscal regimes and mining agreements, to ensure that they can be able to benefit, that the governments and their people can be able to benefit. So basically, the mining contractual and fiscal regime determines who owns the resources, and also it determines how the risks are going to be shared, the responsibilities of the parties, and also the revenue that is to be got from extracting the resources. So it's very key for the contractual regime to be able to ascertain who's going to acquire certain risks, how much royalty is going to be paid, how much taxes are going to be charged by the government, and also it's very essential in determining how much revenue the government will get from the mining sector. So I'm going to share my slides so that we can be able to dig deeper into this topic. All right, so like I already mentioned, the topic is about mining contractual and fiscal regime. And we want to be able to understand how this works, and also how different parties can be able to benefit. Just a minute, let me first stop sharing. All right, so like I mentioned, today's topic is about mining contractual and fiscal arrangements, because the mining contractual and fiscal arrangements, they're very key in determining the risks to be shared amongst the parties, also responsibilities. Parties need to know their own responsibilities, but also they're very keen determining the royalties, and basically understanding how much revenue the government is likely to get from the mining sector. So it's always very important for the governments and the other relevant stakeholders to ensure that there is proper negotiation of these mining agreements. There is proper negotiation of the terms of the fiscal regime, so that at the end of the day, the government and their people can be able to benefit from the resources. So like I've been saying throughout the session, the mining sector has the potential of ensuring economic development for different resource-rich countries. But however, for the country to be able to benefit from the mining sector, they need to negotiate the terms of the fiscal regime. They need to negotiate effective provisions of the mining agreements. And then, most importantly, governance is also very key, because you could have a good fiscal regime, good mining agreements, but then there is weak governance. So governance is also very key. So I'm Dr. Victoria Nalule. I'm an author of 9 books. and I've also done various projects with respect to the mining sector. Okay, just a minute. So there are different types of mining agreements. You have concession agreements, and with the concession agreements, these are very common in different countries, and the government grants the company the right to explore and mine. And as the company has been granted that right to explore and mine the resources, they have the obligation to pay royalties and taxes to the government. So in essence, the government owns the the company owns the extracted minerals after paying taxes and royalties. So with concessions, they're very common, especially in developed countries like Australia, Canada, and different other developing countries. Even Ghana has concessions. And these ones, the only thing you have to note is that the company owns the extracted minerals. So the company is given a license, and then they're also given the rights to own the extracted minerals. And what does the government get in return? It gets royalties and also taxes. Then the key features for this is that the company bears most risk and cost. So the company, most of the mining companies that go in for concessions, they already have the expertise, they have the technical know-how, they have the technology, they have, and most importantly, they have the capital. So they will leverage on what they have to go negotiate with the government to get a concession, and then they will bear all the risks and costs. And after bearing the risks and costs, all the minerals that have been mined or extracted will belong to that company. But what does the government get in return? It will get royalties and taxes. And then most of these agreements are long-term, obviously, often lasting for 10, 20, 30 years. So even these concessions, because of the unique nature of the mining sector, the concessions are also often long-term. And then the other example we can look at are the mineral development agreements. These are negotiated project-specific terms. So these ones are negotiated dependent on the project. So regardless of what the project is, the government and the mining company will negotiate specific terms of that agreement to ensure that the mining sector is being developed. And then we also have another type of agreement, the production sharing agreements. So these ones are mostly common in the oil and gas sector, but they're also now visible in the mining sector. Under these types of agreement, the state retains ownership and they share the minerals that have been produced with the mining company. So here, the company will extract resources and it shares production with the state. But however, there is the option of the cost recovery, whereby a portion goes to the company and then the remaining production profit mineral is split between the company and the government. So the production sharing agreements allow governments to maintain sovereignty over resources while still attracting foreign expertise. So with the production sharing agreements, unlike the concessions, the minerals that have been extracted, they do not belong to the company. The minerals that have been extracted have to be shared between the company and the government. And here, especially for developing countries, these type of agreements are often used because it allows the government, the country, to retain its sovereignty over its natural resources. And also it allows for the transfer of knowledge, transfer of technology, and also training for the people involved from the government. So this is a very good type of agreement because at the end of the day, it's exposing the government to the different types of technologies that are being used by the companies. And then also it allows the government to retain ownership of minerals. Then the next type of agreement we have are the joint ventures. And with joint ventures, the government and company co-own the mining project, and the risks are shared, and also profits are shared. So this is like a partnership. And then the government may hold equity, free or paid. The joint ventures give governments direct exposure to profits, but also to operational risks. So this is like and the government benefits. If there are lots of profits that have been made, the government will benefit. But however, it also exposes the government to risks. So if there are losses that are being made, then the government will also share on the losses. So here I go into detail about the different types of concessions, and we already mentioned that a mining concession is a legal right granted by the state to a company or individual to explore and extract mineral resources within a specified area and time frame. So the key features of mining concessions: first, it's granted through a license or a licensing or concession system. So basically, you need a license. A company can't just go to a different country and they decide that they have rights over these minerals. No, they would need a license that gives them the right over the minerals. And then whatever minerals they extract will belong to the company, but they have to pay royalties and taxes. So these mining licenses cover exploration rights, so the company will have exploration rights, and they could also have extraction or production rights. So it's time-bound and it's subject to renewal, implying that it's for a specified period of time. Like I already mentioned, sometimes it can be 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years. And then it's also often transferable, but with government approval. So if a company decides that it no longer wants to operate in that particular country, they can decide to negotiate with a different mining company and transfer that mining license, but the government has to approve. So what are the rights and obligations under mining concessions? We have to differentiate two rights: the rights of the investor and the obligations of the state. So once the investor has acquired the mining license, they have the exclusive right to mine within the concession area. So the license has to be for a specified area, and it has to be for a specified period of time. So they have the exclusive right to mine within the concession area within that specified period of time. And then they also have ownership of the extracted minerals. So they own all the minerals that have been extracted. And then there is also the ability to recover costs and earn profits. So this is a good arrangement, especially for the companies that are already experienced and companies that are going into countries where the minerals are already there, in that whatever profits they're making, the companies will own the profits. So what are the obligations to the state? Because remember here that investor has already been given the exclusive right to mine and produce minerals and even to own them. So what is the investor's obligations to the state? The investor has to pay royalties, the investor has to pay taxes, and also the investor has to pay fees. So here, to determine whether the government will benefit from the mining sector or not, it will be through the percentage of royalties and taxes and fees that have been negotiated. If the people negotiating, if the experts or professionals negotiating on behalf of the government, they negotiate lower rates for royalties, taxes, and fees, then that means that the governments and the country will not benefit. But if they're able to negotiate higher rates, then that means that the government and the citizens will be able to benefit from the resources. So the key negotiating point here for the government is to ensure higher rates for royalties, taxes, and fees. Otherwise, if these are poorly negotiated, then the country and its citizens will not be able to benefit from their resources. Because remember, the license grants exclusive rights to the company to own all the extracted minerals. So there are different types of mining concessions. There are those in Canada, whereby they have a system of free entry, first come, first served system. And then provinces and territories, contra mining rights, licenses and leases. And then the federal role mainly is in ensuring environmental assessment and federal lands. But however, there should be involvement of all stakeholders, including the indigenous people. So mandatory consultation have to be carried out, especially where projects are likely to affect traditional territories. So the mining concession system in Canada is very interesting, and it's a good example of that freedom of granting licenses to different companies in exchange for them to pay taxes, royalties, and fees. Then the other type of agreement is the production sharing agreement. And here, like we already mentioned, there are two main parties. You have the government and you have the investors. The state retains ownership of minerals, and then the outputs or the minerals that have been extracted, they have to be shared between the government and the investor. And it's common in oil and gas, but it's also common, but there are also countries that have introduced production sharing in the mining sector. So now one might ask, why are mining contracts essential? Like I already mentioned, they define the right to explore and extract. So who has the right to extract? Who has the right to explore? And then also they stipulate the obligations of the investors. Because as an investor, you're not just going to get a right to explore and extract, but there are also some obligations. Like we already mentioned in the concession regime, one of the obligations of the investors to the state is to pay royalties, to pay taxes, and to pay their specified fees. Failure to pay those royalties and taxes, then the government will have a right to cancel your mining license. Mining contracts are also essential because they determine the fiscal terms and governance rules. The fiscal terms are very essential because they will determine whether the country is really going to benefit from the minerals or not. So some of the key features of mining agreements or mining contracts, you have the duration and the license terms. The contract has to be for a specified period of time. Then you have the fiscal obligations. In the mining agreements, you will see the taxes, a provision on taxes, provision on royalties, a provision on the fees. So that is the fiscal regime. And then environmental and social requirements. Mining agreements also contain provisions on environmental protection to ensure that as the investors, they're carrying out their activities, they are also mindful of the environment. And then dispute resolution mechanisms. Because remember, every provision in the mining agreement is capable of leading to a dispute. So in most cases, there are provisions for dispute resolution, and these are mostly through arbitration. So you'll find an arbitration clause in the mining agreement to the effect that in case of any disputes, it will have to be resolved through international arbitration. And that arbitration clause would include the set of arbitration. It would also include the applicable laws. It will also include the number of arbitrators. So it's always good practice to ensure that as you are negotiating mining agreements, you also think of the disputes that are likely to arise and find mechanisms of how to resolve those disputes. And then in some agreements, especially for developing countries, they'll have the stability clauses or stabilization clauses. And these are clauses that are intended to protect the lifespan of the agreement, in that you'll have the legal stabilization clause to the effect that there shouldn't be any changes to laws that are going to have a negative impact to the investor. And then you'll have the economic stabilization clauses to the effect that the fiscal terms are not changed in a way that will be detrimental to the investor. So I already covered stabilization clauses. You can look out for my videos on stabilization clauses. So now we want to look deeper into the topic of fiscal regime in mining contracts. So these are systems through which governments collect revenue from mining. Because remember, for the government, revenue is very key. If a government is able to have a large proportion of revenue, large shares of revenue from the mining sector, then that is good for the government, it's good for the people, it's good for the country. Because it's the revenue that governments will use to invest in infrastructure, it's the revenue that governments will use for economic growth, economic development. So revenue in the mining sector and natural resources, it's really very key. So the fiscal regime determines the state share of benefits. It also determines investor returns, and it's also critical for economic development. So the fiscal regime will determine how much the state is going to share from its mining sector. In other words, if you have royalties and they are paid on production or on all revenue, then you will have to determine how much you're going to benefit from those royalties. Even the fiscal regime includes taxation. The percentage of taxes that the government is getting from the mining sector will determine whether the government is benefiting from the resources or not. So in sense, the fiscal regime really determines whether the government is going to benefit from the resources or it's not going to benefit from the resources. So what are the different types of fiscal instruments? You have royalties, and these are based on production of value. Then you have the corporate tax, corporate income tax, and this is tax on company profits. Then you have the windfall taxes, and this one is applied during high commodity prices. And then you have the state equity participation, where government ownership stake. So countries like Canada do apply the corporate income tax, and then you see royalties in different countries across the globe, including Ghana for their mining sector. They have a percentage of over 5% royalty on gold production. And then the windfall taxes, they're also very key, and we have experienced them in countries such as Australia. So the windfall taxes aim to capture super profits without discouraging investments. And these ones target extraordinary profits when prices are high. So windfall taxes should also be considered by different countries. I already talked about the stability in mining contracts. You should look out for my full video on stabilization clauses and also my article on stabilization clauses. So you have legal stabilization clauses, and then you also have the fiscal stabilization clauses. And these ones, they're good for the investor, but then there is some controversy, especially because it's argued that they limit the state's sovereignty to change laws and taxation laws as they deem fit. So for a full discussion on stabilization clauses, you'll have to look out for my videos and also an article on stabilization clauses. So for the remaining slides, basically, I did take you through stabilization clauses. You have the freezing clause, and these are also referred to as stabilization clause stricto sensu. And freezing clauses are to the effect that the governing laws, general and special, applicable to operations under contract between a company and a sovereign state should be those of the state at the time the contract was executed. Then you have the economic equilibrium clauses, and these seek to reestablish the economic position, which is the economic equilibrium of the contract following changes in law, which have an economic impact on the bargain struck between the host state and its contractual partner. So for the full discussion on stabilization clauses, please look out for my video. And then now we have to ask ourselves, what are the challenges in mining fiscal instruments? The instances of tax avoidance and profit shifting. If a company avoids taxes, then that means that it's going to impact on the government. Then weak administrative capacity. Sometimes you have good laws, taxation laws, you have a good fiscal regime, but then you have weak institutions that are incapable of administering or enforcing those laws. And then volatility of commodity prices. The prices can go high, and sometimes they are low. And if they are low, then that would impact on the government's revenue. And then lack of transparency and accountability in some countries. So what is the good practice in mining contracts? You have to ensure transparent contracts. You have to ensure progressive fiscal regimes. You have to ensure strong institutions. And then you have to ensure that the fiscal regime and mining agreements are in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. So in your free time, you can look out for the different types of agreements, mining agreements in your country or a country of your choice, and then ask yourselves a question of whether the fiscal regime ensures fairness and justice. What is the impact of stabilization clauses? And then what reforms are needed for transparency and accountability? So basically that's it about fiscal regimes and mining contractual arrangements. But the key thing to note today is that the fiscal regime will determine whether a country is going to benefit from its resources or not. So governments ought to have strong teams when negotiating the mining contractual arrangements and fiscal regimes. Otherwise, poorly negotiated contracts and poorly negotiated fiscal terms would be detrimental to the governments. It will also be detrimental to the citizens and the countries. So basically, that's it for today about mining contractual agreements and fiscal regimes. For further details about stabilization clauses, like I mentioned, there is already a video on stabilization clauses, and then my article on stabilization clauses, and then also there is my books on mining law and policy. So all those materials are very key for you to understand the mining sector, the mining contractual arrangements, and the fiscal regime. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.